The bank teller's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass, a sound that echoed through the marble lobby like a slap. Esther Monroe, 78 years old and unbowed, stood there gripping her worn leather folder as if it were a shield, her dark eyes burning holes through the young man's smirk. This wasn't just a bank to Esther. It was her legacy, her blood, her decades of quiet struggle now boiling over in a room full of strangers who saw her as a punchline. The First National Bank of Crestwood, with its polished counters and crisp-suited staff, had no idea who they were mocking. Esther's hands trembled, not from age but from the weight of the truth. She carried a truth that could unravel their smug little world. It was a humid Tuesday morning in Crestwood, Georgia, and the bank was alive with the usual hum of transactions. Customers shuffled through, tapping on phones or signing checks, oblivious to the storm brewing at the front counter. Esther had walked in at 10:17 a.m., her steps slow but deliberate, her gray coat frayed at the cuffs but immaculately clean. She'd asked for the manager. The teller, a wiry kid named Dylan with a tie too tight for his ego, had grinned like she'd told a bad joke. "Ma'am, you say you own this bank?" Dylan's voice dripped with amusement, loud enough to draw glances from the other tellers. A woman in a navy blazer, probably the supervisor, stifled a chuckle behind her hand. Esther didn't flinch. She'd heard worse in her 7-decade slurs hissed in diners, doors slammed in her face, dreams crushed under the weight of a world that didn't want her to rise. But this was different. This was her moment. "I'm here to discuss my claim," Esther said, her voice low but steady, each word carved from years of patience. She slid the folder across the counter, its edges yellowed but the contents pristine. Dylan didn't even glance at it. He leaned forward, elbows on the counter, his grin widening. "Ma'am, I'm sure you've got some important papers there, but this is a bank, not a history museum. Maybe you meant to go to the library?" A few customers snickered. The air thickened with condescension. Esther's jaw tightened. She'd expected this. She'd lived through Jim Crow, through redlining, through every subtle and overt way the system told her she didn't belong. But she hadn't survived all that to be laughed out of this room. She tapped the folder with a single finger. "Open it." Dylan sighed, rolling his eyes for the audience now gathering tellers, customers, even the security guard by the door, who looked more curious than concerned. He flipped open the folder, skimming the first page with exaggerated boredom. Then his eyes froze. His smirk faltered, just for a second, before he caught himself and shoved the folder back. "This is nonsense. You're telling me you've got some kind of deed to this bank? Lady, please." The supervisor, Karen, stepped forward now, her smile tight and professional. "Ma'am, I'm sure there's a misunderstanding. Let's take this to a private office. Okay?" Her tone was patronizing, like she was humoring a child. Esther didn't move. "There's no misunderstanding," Esther said. "My grandfather built this bank. His name was Elijah Monroe. These papers prove it. And I'm here to take back what's mine." The lobby went quiet. Even the hum of the air conditioner seemed to pause. Karen's smile twitched. Dylan let out a nervous laugh, but it died in his throat when he saw the look in Esther's eyes. It wasn't anger, not exactly. It was certainty unshakable, bone-deep certainty. 60 years ago, Elijah Monroe had been a titan in Crestwood's black community. A carpenter-turned-entrepreneur, he'd scraped together every penny he earned to buy a plot of land in 1948, right where this bank now stood. He'd built a small lending house, a beacon for black families locked out of white-owned banks. Elijah's dream was simple. Give his people a chance to own something, to build something, to defy a system rigged against them. But dreams like that don't survive in a world that hates you. By 1963, The bank was gone, seized in a shady deal that reeked of fraud. Its ownership transferred to a white businessman named Harold Grayson. Elijah died a year later, broken but never beaten. Esther, just 16 then, had watched it all unfold, her young heart hardening with every injustice. Now, 6 decades later, she stood in the same spot where her grandfather's dream had been stolen. The folder in her hands held the evidence she'd spent years uncovering: deeds, contracts, letters, and a notarized affidavit from a long-dead lawyer who'd witnessed the theft. Esther had tracked down every scrap, piecing together a truth the world had buried. She wasn't here to beg. She was here to demand. Karen took the folder this time, her fingers hesitant as she flipped through the pages. Her face paled. This can't be right," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She looked up at Esther, then back at the documents, as if hoping they'd vanish. They didn't. The security guard, a burly man named Marcus, stepped closer, his curiosity now tinged with unease. "What's going on, Karen?" he asked, peering over her shoulder. The customers were no longer pretending to mind their own business. They formed a loose semicircle, phones out, recording the scene like vultures circling a kill. Esther didn't care about the cameras. She cared about the truth. "My grandfather's name is on that deed," she said, her voice rising just enough to carry. "He bought this land fair and square. Harold Grayson cheated him out of it, and this bank has been profiting off that theft ever since. I'm here to set it right." Dylan snorted, but it was weaker now, less confident. "You're saying you're, the rightful owner? This is a multimillion-dollar operation, ma'am. You think you can just walk in with some old papers and read them?" Esther cut him off. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp, like a blade slicing through the noise. "Read every word, then tell me I'm wrong." Karen's hands shook as she turned another page. The documents were meticulous: dates, signatures, notarizations, all in order. There was a letter from Elijah himself, written in 1962, detailing the deal that stripped him of his bank. It named names, including Grayson's, and described a meeting where threats were made to keep Elijah silent. The final page was a legal claim, filed by Esther 3 months ago, asserting her family's right to the property. The lobby was a pressure cooker now. Customers whispered, their voices a low buzz. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, his hand resting on his radio. Karen looked like she might be sick. We'll need to verify this," she stammered. "This is above my pay grade." "Then get someone who can handle it," Esther said. "I'm not leaving until this is settled." The standoff stretched on, seconds ticking by like hours. Dylan, still trying to save face, muttered something about crazy old ladies. But no one laughed this time. The air had shifted. Esther wasn't just an elderly woman anymore, she was a force, a reckoning. Her presence filled the room, her silence louder than any shout. Marcus broke the tension, his voice low but firm. "Karen, call the regional manager. Now." His eyes flicked to Esther, and for the first time, there was something like respect in them. He'd grown up in Crestwood, heard the stories of Elijah Monroe, the man who dared to dream big in a town that didn't allow it. Marcus hadn't believed those stories until now. Karen fumbled with her phone, her fingers clumsy as she dialed. The customers were openly staring now, some murmuring support, others skeptical but intrigued. Esther stood tall, her folder now back in her hands. The regional manager, a man named Richard Holt, arrived 20 minutes later, his suit wrinkled from a rush drive. He was a tall, balding white man in his 50s, with the kind of practiced smile that screamed corporate training. But when he saw the documents, his smile faded fast. He read in silence, his jaw tightening with every page. When he finally looked up at Esther, His face was a mask of unease. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, his voice careful. "These documents are compelling, but you understand, claims like this take time to verify. There's a process." "I know all about your processes," Esther interrupted. "I've lived through them. Redlining, foreclosures, lies dressed up as paperwork. My grandfather trusted your processes, and they destroyed him. I'm not here to play that game." Holt blinked, caught off guard by her intensity. The crowd was growing, spilling out into the parking lot as word spread. Phones were still recording, capturing every word. Esther didn't care. Let them record. Let the world see. "What do you want, Mrs. Monroe?" Holt asked, his voice quieter now, almost respectful. "I want what's mine," she said. "This bank was built on my grandfather's land. His sweat, his dreams. You don't get to laugh that away. I want it back, or I want justice." The word justice hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. For the first time, Holt didn't have an answer. Karen looked like she wanted to disappear. Dylan was silent, his bravado gone. Marcus nodded slightly, as if he'd known all along that this moment was coming. The truth was, Esther didn't just want the bank. She wanted the world to know what had been taken not just from her, but from every family like hers, every dream crushed under the weight of prejudice. She'd spent years digging through archives, tracking down witnesses, piecing together a story the system had tried to erase. This wasn't just about ownership. It was about dignity, about rewriting a wrong that had festered for generations. Holt cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "We'll need to escalate this to our legal team. I assure you, Mrs. Monroe, we'll handle this with the utmost seriousness." Esther's eyes narrowed. "You'd better, because I'm not going anywhere." The lobby erupted in murmurs, some supportive, some hostile. A young woman in the crowd, clutching a deposit slip, stepped forward. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice shaking. "Did they really steal her grandfather's bank?" Esther turned to her, her face softening for the first time. "It's true," she said. "And it's not just my story. It's all of ours." The woman nodded, tears in her eyes. Others began to speak up, sharing whispers of their own families' struggles, homes lost, businesses denied, dreams deferred. The bank, once a sterile symbol of wealth, became a battleground of stories, each one a thread in the tapestry of injustice. Holt raised his hands, trying to calm the crowd. "Please, everyone, let's keep this orderly. We'll investigate Mrs. Monroe's claims thoroughly." "Thoroughly?" Esther's voice cut through again. "You think I came here with half a story? I've got receipts, Mr. Holt. And I've got time." The crowd buzzed louder now, the energy shifting in Esther's favor. Marcus stepped closer to her, not as a guard but as a silent ally. The young woman who'd spoken up was now filming, her phone trained on Esther's face. Dylan, for once, had nothing to say. Esther opened her folder again, pulling out a single photograph, a grainy black and white image of Elijah Monroe standing in front of his lending house, a proud smile on his face. She held it up for the crowd to see. "This is my grandfather," she said. "He built something for us, and they took it, but they can't take his truth." The room was electric now, every eye on Esther. She wasn't just fighting for a bank. She was fighting for every person who'd ever been told they didn't belong, every dream dismissed, every life diminished by the weight of prejudice. And in that moment, she was winning. Holt's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it, his face grim. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, his voice strained. "Our legal team is on their way. Can we discuss this privately?" Esther smiled, a small, fierce thing. "I've been private my whole life," she said. "Today, I'm loud." The crowd roared, some clapping, others shouting encouragement. Esther stood at the center of it all, her folder clutched to her chest, her grandfather's legacy alive in her hands. This wasn't the end, not yet. But it was a beginning. The bank lobby pulsed with raw energy, a cauldron of whispered arguments and emboldened voices. Esther Monroe stood unwavering, her photograph of Elijah Monroe raised like a banner, its faded edges a testament to a fight that had outlived its original warrior. The crowd, now spilling beyond the glass doors into the humid Crestwood afternoon, was no longer just a collection of customers. They were witnesses to a reckoning, their phones capturing every second of a moment that felt bigger than the marble walls around them. Richard Holt, the regional manager, was sweating now, his polished demeanor cracking under the weight of Esther's evidence and the crowd's growing unrest. He gestured toward a side office, his voice tight. "Mrs. Monroe, please. Let's take this somewhere quieter. We can resolve this professionally." Esther's eyes locked onto his, sharp and unyielding. "Professional?" she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades. "Your people laughed at me. That's not professional. That's personal. And I'm done being quiet." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. The young woman who'd spoken earlier, now holding her phone steady, nodded fiercely. "She's right," she called out, her voice cutting through the hum. "You can't just brush this off." Others joined in, their voices overlapping, some angry, some curious, all demanding answers. The security guard, Marcus, stood closer to Esther now, his presence a silent shield. He'd grown up hearing stories of injustice in Crestwood, but seeing it unfold in real time hit differently. His hand no longer hovered near his radio. It rested at his side, a choice made. Holt's phone buzzed again, and he glanced at it, his face paling. "The legal team is 10 minutes out," he said, more to himself than to Esther. He turned to Karen, the supervisor, who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. "Clear the lobby. This is getting out of hand." Karen hesitated, her eyes darting between Holt, Esther, and the crowd. "Sir, I don't think." "Do it," Holt snapped, his composure fraying. But the crowd wasn't moving. If anything, they pressed closer, their voices growing louder. A man in a delivery uniform shouted, "Let her speak." A woman with a stroller added, "We want the truth." The lobby, once a sterile space of transactions, had become a stage for something far bigger, a collision of past and present, of power and resistance. Esther lowered the photograph, tucking it carefully back into her folder. She didn't need it anymore. The image of Elijah Monroe was burned into the room's collective memory. She took a step forward, closing the gap between herself and Holt. "You don't get to control this," she said, her voice low but resonant. "My grandfather built this place for people like me, people you've spent years ignoring. You don't get to tell me to wait." Holt opened his mouth, but no words came. The crowd's energy was a living thing now, feeding off Esther's resolve. Marcus spoke up, his deep voice steady. "She's got the papers, Mr. Holt. I saw them. They're real. You gonna do something about it? Or are we just gonna stand here all day?" The question hung in the air, a challenge wrapped in calm. Holt's eyes flicked to Marcus, then back to Esther, calculating his next move. He wasn't used to being cornered. Not in his own bank. Not by an elderly woman and a security guard who just crossed a line. But the documents were undeniable, and the crowd was a powder keg. He needed to buy time. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, forcing a smile. "I hear you. We'll review your claim immediately. But we need to follow protocol. You understand." Esther's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. "Protocol," she repeated, the word dripping with disdain. "Your protocol is why I'm here." Your protocol stole my grandfather's legacy. Your protocol kept people like me out of places like this for generations. Don't talk to me about protocol. The crowd erupted again, louder this time, a mix of cheers and angry murmurs. A teenager in the back, his hoodie emblazoned with a local high school logo, shouted, "They're scared of her." The words sparked laughter, but it wasn't mocking, it was triumphant. A release of tension that had been building for years, maybe lifetimes. Karen, still clutching Esther's folder like it might burn her, handed it to Holt. He took it reluctantly, his fingers brushing the worn leather as if it were radioactive. He flipped through the pages again, slower this time, his eyes lingering on the deed, the affidavit, the letter from Elijah himself. Each document was a nail in the bank's carefully constructed narrative, a narrative that had erased people like Esther and her grandfather from its history. The legal team arrived minutes later, 2 men in crisp suits, their faces unreadable. The older one, a man named Gregory Weiss, introduced himself with a curt nod. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm with the bank's legal counsel. We'll need to take these documents for review." Esther didn't budge. "You can review them right here," she said. "I'm not letting them out of my sight. Not after what happened to my grandfather." Weiss raised an eyebrow, but something in Esther's tone, or maybe the crowd behind her, made him reconsider arguing. He nodded to his colleague, who pulled out a tablet and began scanning the documents on the spot. The lobby was quieter now, the tension shifting from explosive to expectant. Everyone was waiting to see what came next. As Weiss read, his expression grew tighter, his fingers pausing over certain lines. He whispered something to his colleague, who nodded grimly. Holt watched them, his earlier confidence replaced by a nervous fidgeting. Esther, meanwhile, stood like a statue, her eyes never leaving Weiss. She'd spent years preparing for this moment, tracking down every piece of evidence, every witness, every scrap of truth. She wasn't here to lose. The scanning took 15 minutes, an eternity in the charged atmosphere. When Weiss finally looked up, his face was carefully neutral. "Mrs. Monroe," he said, "these documents appear to be legitimate, but we'll need to verify their authenticity with the county records office. This could take time." "How much time?" Esther asked, her voice cutting through his corporate vagueness.
Weiss hesitated.
"Weeks, possibly months. There's a process." "There's always a process," Esther interrupted, her voice rising. "My grandfather waited for your process. He died waiting. I'm not him. I'm not waiting." The crowd stirred again, their voices a low rumble of support. Weiss glanced at Holt, who looked like he wanted to crawl under the counter. Marcus stepped forward, his presence grounding the moment. "She's got a point, Mr. Weiss. Those papers look real. You can't just stall her." Weiss's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew the optics were but a room full of people, many of them black, watching an elderly woman fight a system that had already taken so much from her. He nodded slowly. "We'll expedite the review. You have my word." "Your word means nothing to me," Esther said, her voice steady but laced with fire. "I want action. I want my grandfather's name on this bank again. I want what was stolen returned." The crowd roared, the sound shaking the glass doors. Holt flinched, his eyes darting to the security cameras overhead. Weiss raised a hand, trying to calm the room. "We'll start the process today," he said. "But we need to do this legally. You'll be contacted with updates." Esther didn't respond. She didn't need to. The crowd was her voice now, their shouts and murmurs carrying her truth beyond the lobby, into the streets, onto social media. The young woman with the phone was still recording, her video already going viral, the hashtag Justice for Elijah trending before the bank's legal team could even leave the building. As the crowd began to disperse, Esther stayed put, her folder clutched to her chest. Marcus stood beside her, a quiet ally. The young woman approached, her eyes bright with admiration. "Mrs. Monroe, I'm posting this everywhere," she said. "People need to know." Esther nodded, a flicker of warmth in her eyes. "Thank you, child. Tell them the truth. That's all I ask." The next few weeks were a whirlwind. The bank's legal team scrambled to verify Esther's documents, but the evidence was ironclad. County records confirmed Elijah Monroe's purchase of the land in 1948, and the affidavit from the lawyer, long buried in a forgotten archive, detailed the fraudulent transfer to Harold Grayson. Social media kept the pressure on, with thousands sharing Esther's story, demanding accountability. Protests formed outside the bank, small at first but growing each day, signs bearing Elijah's name and Esther's face. Esther became a symbol, not just in Crestwood but across the country. News outlets picked up the story, framing it as a David and Goliath battle against systemic racism. The bank, desperate to save face, offered a settlement, a hefty sum to make Esther go away. She refused. "This isn't about money," she told a reporter outside her modest home, her voice steady on national TV. "It's about right and wrong." The legal battle stretched on, but Esther never wavered. She attended every meeting, every hearing, her folder always in hand. Marcus quit his job at the bank, joining her at protests, his uniform replaced by a t-shirt reading Elijah's Legacy. The young woman, whose name was Aisha, became Esther's unofficial spokesperson, amplifying her voice online and organizing community support. 6 months later, the court ruled in Esther's favor. The land beneath First National Bank was rightfully hers, a fact the bank could no longer deny. They offered to buy it back at market value, but Esther had other plans. She didn't want the bank razed, she wanted it transformed. With the settlement funds she eventually accepted, she established the Elijah Monroe Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing loans and resources to Black entrepreneurs in Crestwood. The bank, under pressure, agreed to partner with the foundation, renaming its main branch the Elijah Monroe Community Center. On the day of the ribbon cutting, Esther stood before a crowd of hundreds, her gray coat replaced by a vibrant blue dress, her folder now framed on the wall behind her. "This isn't just for me," she said, her voice carrying over the applause. "This is for my grandfather, for every person who was told they couldn't, for every dream stolen. We're taking it back." The crowd cheered, tears streaming down faces young and old. Aisha, standing beside her, held up a sign that read, "Justice Won." Marcus, now a volunteer with the foundation, smiled quietly, his pride evident. The bank, once a symbol of exclusion, was now a beacon of possibility, its walls adorned with Elijah's story, Esther's victory. Esther's fight wasn't over, she knew that. The system was still broken, still tilted against people like her. But she'd carved out a piece of justice, a piece of hope, and that was enough for now. As she cut the ribbon, she looked out at the crowd, her eyes fierce and alive. "Don't stop fighting," she said. "Not ever." Her words lingered, a challenge to everyone there, to everyone watching. What do you believe is right? And what will you do to make it real?